How I fix the alien universe. First of all, in order for this to work, the engineers and space jockeys have to be two separate species. While early drafts of Prometheus stated that the LV moon that the Prometheus landed on and the LV moon the Nostromo landed on were in the same system, such a timeline would not make sense, as the remains of the engineers and Prometheus were still juicy, while the remains of the space jockey and alien were fossilized in a process that takes millions of years, and the two movies were only separated by a couple hundred years. I suppose one could say that it was only the head of the engineer that was preserved. But, moving on. In my theory, the engineers and jockeys are two separate species that had a love-hate, or more than likely, a hate-hate relationship with each other. They borrowed from each other's technology, hence why their ships look similar, but we'll come back to them later. We have to start in chronological order after all, and my own theory pays respect to the genius that is the xenomorph anatomy, because in my theory, xenomorphs came before everything. The xenomorphs were ancient beings who dominated the entire galaxy, if not the entire universe, not through intelligence, but through savagery. Somehow, they alone were able to evolve into the apex predator of their own world. Chance encounters with more intelligent life gave them the opportunity to spread, eventually leading to the loss of all other life in the galaxy, if not the universe. Despite lacking the ability to travel from planet to planet, these perfect parasites mastered the art of lying in wait for their hosts to carry them to the next food source. The more advanced an outside species became, the more the xenomorphs would spread when encountered. Whenever there was no more food, be it on a planet or the entire universe, the remaining xenomorph colonies would go into hibernation, waiting for suitable hosts to find them and start the cycle all over again. In the event that the xenomorphs had spread throughout the cosmos, this would take millions and billions of years. Sometimes evolution might have to start all over again from the primordial soup level until new life forms of sufficient biomass could provide the xenomorphs the sustenance they required to spread. Now, into the meat of my theory, or should I say, the biomatter of my theory. Lame joke. Moving on. After a couple billion years, several sentient beings evolved, including the space jockeys, elephant aliens, engineers, albino bodybuilders, and the Yautja, the predators, who we'll come back to later. Engineers on their homeworld found fossilized xenomorph eggs, as mentioned in the movie Alien Covenant. The engineers began experiments on these fossilized eggs and found that certain aspects of them were still alive. To do these experiments, they transported the eggs, or whatever goo they found, to other worlds in an attempt to revive them in relative safety. One of the engineers' experiments was successful, but these experimental regions were completely overwhelmed by these revived aliens or xenomorph-adjacent species. However, the engineers were smart enough to keep the xenomorphs from spreading too far, which was why they experimented on them on another planet. I theorize that this planet was the space jockey homeworld, or one nearby enough to lead to the destruction of the space jockey homeworld. Hence, this could be the impetus for the theoretical Jockey-Engineer war. At some point, the engineers managed to isolate a gene from the xenomorph facehugger, which allowed them unprecedented range of genetic manipulation. You see, the embryo that the facehugger implants does not simply grow an alien. It rewrites the host's own biology to become the perfect placenta for the gestating chestburster. Blood vessels are formed to transfer nutrients from the host into the growing alien. Thus, when the chestburster emerges, it is not the shattering of the sternum that kills the host, but the ripping out of all of the temporary blood vessels connected to vital organs. Additionally, while gestating, the xenomorph absorbs genetic traits from the host, as evidenced with the dog/bull alien in Alien 3 and the Predalien of Alien vs. Predator 2. Back to the engineers. After isolating the gene-manipulating substance of the facehuggers, or black goo, they were able to manipulate the genes of any species in any way they wanted, be it by seeding life or growing armor. Perhaps they used this ability to create technology reminiscent of their rival space jockeys as an insult towards them, or to give them the element of surprise against the jockeys, hence an explanation for their horseshoe-shaped ships and elephantine armor. Regardless, it would be effective psychological warfare, especially if the space jockeys put much value into trunk size. For example, if having a short trunk was a sign of weakness in jockey culture, and you had been beaten by someone who had a short trunk, you would most likely be quite demoralized. The xenomorph genetic bonding agent, or black goo, would, depending on its composition, allow for reshaping of entire organisms, or, lacking the proper refinement, mutating them into xenomorph-like monsters, often with acid blood. In a way, perhaps the black goo had a bit of its own xenomorph intelligence, kept working to try and make things more and more close to what it came from, even when manipulated by the engineers. The xenomorph genetic bonding agent still wanted to go back to being a xenomorph. But back to the engineers. They used this biotechnology to attempt to create various bioweapons by seeding life on several worlds, one of which was Earth. Then again, perhaps the Earth was just a step in a larger plan. Step 1, create biomatter. Step 2, use biomatter to create xenomorph-like weapons. Step 3, profit. Thus, the explanation of the Earth cave paintings pointing out the LV system could be that the engineers were simply telling ancient humans that they would be back for them at some point. Take that as you will, whether the humans understood that to be a good thing or a bad thing. At some point around the creation of humanity, the jockeys, who were losing the war against the engineers, realized that the only thing that could defeat the engineer bioweapons was the source of the weapon's power, the original xenomorph itself. While most of the jockeys fled off into space to try and survive, at least one of them went off to one of the worlds the engineers had seeded with xenomorphs, perhaps even the former jockey homeworld, now overrun. There, the jockey somehow collected several eggs and placed them into a stasis/bomb bay, what we saw in the original Alien, complete with an energy shield above it. It was actually a prop that the production team borrowed from their neighboring rock band, The Who. Unfortunately, something went wrong with this plan. Perhaps there was a big battle between the space jockeys and the engineers, which led to the sabotage of both races' plans. After all, the two LV worlds are in the same system. The engineers, on their way to attack Earth, either to start over or use the Earthling biomatter for creating new xenomorph-style bioweapons, would be shocked to see the space jockey ship on the way to attack them. They would attempt to fight back, and possibly succeed, forcing the space jockey ship to crash land on a neighboring moon. In the struggle of the crash, one of the facehuggers would get loose and facehug the jockey. In the chaos of the battle, however, the engineers would also lose control of the experiments on their own moon. Everyone would die except for that one engineer who decided to hide in hibernation deep down in his own ship. The jockey, for his part, would wake up and realize that his plan had failed and that he was about to die. He would do his best to ensure that the crashed ship was completely scuttled, just to make sure that the xenomorph couldn't use his genetic memory to fly the ship away. The jockey would also leave a distress signal, or more of a warning, to tell his own people to stay away, as to not get infected. The xenomorph then burst out, killing the jockey, but devoid of any possible hosts or biomatter, the xenomorph either went into hibernation until the Nostromo and others showed up, or else simply just died. I've also heard a theory that the predators hunting humans and the engineers becoming peaceful are somewhat connected. I can't remember if this was someone else's theory or my own, but here it goes. For this theory to work, there must have been a predator-engineer war as well. The predators, possibly, were beating the engineers, due to their use of nuclear-grade explosives. So, once again, using their prowess in psychological warfare, the engineers found the best way to win against the predators. Simply, become pacifist. Due to the predators' code of honor, they would leave the engineers alone, as they could no longer provide a good fight. At some point, the predators discovered the xenomorphs and found them to be the ultimate hunt. As the xenomorphs were so ancient, as evidenced by the engineer mural of one in their black goo storage chamber that the Prometheus found, as well as the fossilized ovomorphs on their home planet, perhaps the predators had been hunting xenomorphs as their blooding ritual for long before the engineers even started using them. Perhaps the uncontrolled xenomorph outbreaks were the impetus for the predator-engineer war. Somewhere along the line, the predators found a way of transporting eggs to primitive cultures and convincing the natives to sacrifice themselves to be hosts for the hunt. This practice was most likely discontinued after it became too risky when the predators had to nuke an entire city, the only way to be sure. However, in using the engineers' offspring, the humans, as cattle for xenomorphs, the predators were shocked at the ingenuity and violence of such a seemingly weak race. Wishing to relive the glory days of the engineer war, the predators would start hunting the still violent clones of the engineers, the humans. Predators continued coming to Earth, but for fights with humans, rather than xenomorphs, as witnessed in the in-universe chronological order: Prey, Predator 1, and Predator 2. Xenomorph hunts would still continue elsewhere, as evidenced by the xenomorph skull on the ship in Predator 2, and the acid blooding of the chieftain Predator at the end of Alien vs. Predator, but overall, no more xenomorph hunts would happen on Earth. Until a couple humans accidentally reactivated an ancient pyramid, where a queen xenomorph was stored. Despite the danger, the Predators couldn't pass up an opportunity to relive their old glory days, and beyond that, they still needed to find a way to contain the outbreak to ensure that the xenomorphs didn't find a way off-world. Thus, we get the events of Alien vs. Predator 1 and 2, leading to the destruction of all xenomorphs on Earth, the Yutani Corp finding Predator technology, and the Weyland Corp getting obsessed with the xenomorph. We then have a bunch of random Predator movies like Predators and The Predator, whose plot points are very convoluted, but I'll try to piece them together here. There starts to be some kind of Predator civil war, in which each side uses gene splicing to make themselves better. The movie Predators, in which human killers are abducted to be hunted down on a predator world, briefly references that there are two species of predator, one bigger than the other, that didn't get along. In The Predator, one of the sides, at the end, gives humanity an awesome predator-killing suit of armor. My guess is something happens along the way to mess all of that up and make it pointless in the future. Now, we get into the new Alien movies: Prometheus, Alien Covenant, and soon enough, Alien Romulus. Weyland, still obsessed with the xenomorph and the immortality theorized to be possibly distilled from it, realizes that an ancient alien race may have been involved in its creation, or more accurately, manipulation of its genes. The ship Prometheus goes out to investigate, finds the Engineer bioweapons facility, messes up their whole mission because everyone there is incompetent, and gets most everyone killed, but not before preventing the last Engineer warrior from completing his mission to destroy humanity. As for the teaser chestburster creature at the end, known as the Deacon, a comic explains that it just turned itself into a giant fleshy mountain or something inconsequential like that, which survivors from the Hadley's Hope colony in Alien 2 encounter hundreds of years later. The two survivors of Prometheus, Shaw and David, then go off to find the original engineers. According to my theory, David reads up on the engineers and their history of genetic manipulation. He becomes disgusted with how they took the perfect organism and distilled it for their own ends, and decides that they all deserve to die for it. After gaining Shaw's trust and having her rebuild his body, he kills her. David then uses the ship's bioweapons to wipe out the Engineer populace. This populace most likely became peaceful after the aforementioned Predator conflict. Thus, the remaining Engineer society became stagnant with their lack of any challenge. Regardless, David kills them all. He then takes the time to research the effects of the bioweapon on the wildlife of the planet, as well as the corpse of Shaw, as a means of reverse engineering the Engineer's reverse engineering. After finding the fossilized xenomorph eggs and attempting to revive/clone them, David discovers that his research cannot progress any further without living hosts. Rather than beat himself up about it, he starts broadcasting a popular folk song, hoping to lure some random morons in. It works, and we get the events of Alien Covenant. He watches the crew struggle against the imperfect neomorphs and conducts his final experiment to find that he has recreated the perfect organism. He kills and replaces another android, and then proceeds to infect the crew of colonists with mini facehuggers he transported in his body. After this random storyline is probably thrown out in whatever they decide to excrete in Alien Romulus, I'm guessing Weyland and Yutani join up, find David and his xenomorphs, but someone ends up destroying them all. Studying up on the lore, the company finds that there could be samples of other live xenomorphs out there somewhere, as it was not the engineers or David who made them, merely experimented on them. To claim that the aliens were engineered by such weaklings such as albino bodybuilders or androids simply cheapens them. Now we get to the original Alien. Several hundred years pass. Most of these are just facts, not theories. Weyland, now Weyland Yutani, is still obsessed with obtaining the xenomorph. The old man is dead, but his dream is still alive, or at least the immense profit they can make in the fields of medicine and the military. They intercept a transmission, this part's a theory, which their records tell them is a warning from the Engineer's ancient enemies, the space jockeys. They arrange for an expendable crew, ones who have caused them trouble in the past, to be assigned aboard the Nostromo to pick it up. The events of Alien, Alien Isolation, and Aliens happen, as well as several of the other little books they've come up with. And despite the best efforts of Ellen Ripley, xenomorph outbreaks start happening everywhere. The Alien comics and Alien 3 start to contradict here, as they came out around the same time, and some of the comics were written before Alien 3. A lot of these comics had Newt, Hicks, and Ripley continue working together to kill aliens. Well, Newt and Hicks. Ripley showed up a little later. After Alien 3, however, they retconned a lot. First, they tried to say that Alien 3 was just a rumor, but then they seemed to give up and say that Newt and Hicks were other characters with different names, and the Ripley who had met up with them was just an android replica. The recent video game Alien Colonial Marines had an interesting idea to bring Hicks back by saying that Hicks got woken up for a mission, then killed someone else and put him in the pod. It was this random person who was discovered by Ripley in Alien 3. The comics at first said that Ripley was woken up just 3 days after Aliens by Weyland-Yutani. They press gag her into service, bring her back to Acheron, to the space jockey juggernaut, where some eggs and aliens have survived the nuclear blast. She works with them, but manages to sabotage the mission and wipe out the aliens completely, then escape. At least that's what I remember of it. I'm wondering if something could be done for Newt in order to keep her alive as well, and keep the Alien 3 and 4 events still okay. Perhaps Weyland-Yutani just replaced Newt and or Hicks with lookalikes. Later on in the comics, they say that the Ripley who woke up right after Aliens and blew up the space jockey juggernaut was actually an android given false memories of being woken up and forced to work for Weyland-Yutani to save her friends. Weyland-Yutani could have, of course, created such an android with free will to help get the aliens. We could say that either they can't filter out free will from androids based off of people, or say that Weyland-Yutani didn't want to risk losing any intel that the real Ripley knew. In the course of Hicks' Colonial Marines adventure, or the Ripley comic adventure, Weyland-Yutani managed to get their hands on a queen facehugger egg. The explanation from 3 that the queen had somehow snuck the egg onto the ship falls rather flat when you consider that the queen had ripped off her egg sac. I guess the explanation could be that the company managed to get a queen egg somewhere, but were unable to smuggle it back to where they wanted. Due to whatever unforeseen hardships, the only way the company could get the queen facehugger out was to store it on Ripley's ship, and then send it to a penal colony so it would be easier to recover without any credible witnesses. I suppose, though, we could also say that the alien queen's biology allowed her to keep a single royal egg still attached to her body rather than to the egg sac. But regardless, Hicks got up to his Colonial Marines adventure, and the corporation woke up Newt and sent her back to Earth, replacing her in her pod with some random girl who had died elsewhere, possibly to instill a sense of hopelessness in Ripley that would make her more likely to give up and let the company take the Queen chestburster out of her safely. As for why they would keep Newt alive, perhaps they suspected what would happen later in the comics. That being, from prolonged proximity to the Queen, Newt would develop a telepathic connection to the mind of the xenomorphs. Thus, the events of Alien 3, Colonial Marines, and the comic books could still happen simultaneously. In the comics, there were rumors of a bald Ripley fighting aliens on a prison planet. At the time, I believe this was just the comics' attempt to say that Alien 3 was just a rumor and didn't happen, or elsewise was an alternate reality. The company messes up, and Earth gets overrun by aliens. Now for a summary of the Alien comics and books that take place after 3, and possibly after 4 as well. Free of my own theories this time. The company messes up, and the Earth gets overrun by aliens. Hicks and Newt work together with lots of Marines to nuke lots of worlds that have xenomorphs on them. Eventually, Hicks, Newt, and a Ripley android manage to track down the Queen Mother alien, the mother of all queens. They capture her and bring her to the currently alien-overrun Earth, thus luring all of the aliens to gather around her. Then they set off a massive nuke to take them all out, saving Earth from xenomorph occupation. A space jockey that has been waiting in the winds then attempts to take Earth for itself. It pretends to be friendly to meet with the president, then turns on him and starts killing his men. The president then eats a genetically modified alien embryo, so Chestburster comes out within seconds to attack the jockey. A dying android reports the situation to the base, and the ship is destroyed by a series of missiles. That's just a quick recap of the alien invasion of Earth. Now for Alien Resurrection. After years of rebuilding, Earth is back. Then again, perhaps this takes place between 3 and the Earth invasion. Regardless, the military successor to Weyland-Yutani clones Ripley to try and bring back the alien queen. The science behind this is, yet again, the black goo, as Ripley was not only implanted with an embryo, but the embryo also genetically modified her biology to serve as the perfect placenta. Thus, any samples of her DNA post-implantation have xenomorph DNA as well. After 7 failures, this cloning process finally works, but the aliens break out and overrun everything. Eventually, everyone there is killed. All that's left is the Ripley xenomorph hybrid, the Winona Ryder android, and some other survivors. After this, we could possibly have a very odd and teary reunion between the Ripley android, grown-up Newt, Old Man Hicks, and now Xenomorph Ripley. Then on to some of the later books. Later in chronological timeline, but earlier in when they were written. A lot of these come from about 20 or 30 years ago. After rebuilding, it's discovered that with enough research, the resin/jelly that the aliens make, especially the ones that the Queen uses, can do things like buff people up or cure cancer. Humanity once again tries going out to seek out leftover alien hives to get this new immortality drug. Some people call it Xenozip. And you can all guess how that goes for them. So, that is my theory on how to organize and combine all of the current alien lore in a way that gives proper honor to the most beloved aspects of the stories, and relegates the more recent failures like Alien 3, Covenant, Prometheus, and possibly Romulus, though it might be good. I don't want to prejudge it, to being nothing more than minor footnotes in alien history.